PART IV. Place Names, the Name. 3. Françoise found it too cold to stand about, so we walked to the Pont de la Concorde to see the Seine frozen over, on to which every one, even children, walked fearlessly, as though upon an enormous whale, stranded, defenseless, and about to be cut up. We returned to the Champs Elysées. I was growing sick with misery between the motionless wooden horses and the white lawn, caught in a net of black paths from which the snow had been cleared, while the statue that surmounted it held in its hand a long pendant icicle which seemed to explain its gesture. The old lady herself, having folded up her debates, asked a passing nursemaid the time, thanking her with "How very good of you," then begged the road sweeper to tell her grandchildren to come, as she felt cold, adding, "A thousand thanks. I am sorry to give you so much trouble." Suddenly the sky was rent in two. Between the Punch and Judy and the horses, against the opening horizon, I had just seen, like a miraculous sign, Mademoiselle's blue feather. And now Gilberte was running at full speed towards me, sparkling and rosy beneath a cap trimmed with fur, enlivened by the cold, by being late, by her anxiety for a game. Shortly before she reached me, she slipped on a piece of ice, and, either to regain her balance, or because it appeared to her graceful, or else pretending that she was on skates, it was with outstretched arms that she smilingly advanced as though to embrace me. "Bravo! Bravo! That's splendid! Topping, I should say, like you, sporting, I suppose I ought to say, only I'm 101, a woman of the old school," exclaimed the lady, uttering, on behalf of the voiceless Champs Elysées, their thanks to Gilberte for having come, without letting herself be frightened away by the weather. "You are like me, faithful at all costs to our old Champs Elysées. We are two brave souls. You wouldn't believe me, I dare say, if I told you that I love them, even like this. This snow, I know you'll laugh at me, it makes me think of Ermine," and the old lady began to laugh at herself. The first of these days, to which the snow, a symbol of the powers that were able to deprive me of the sight of Gilberte, imparted the sadness of a day of separation, almost the aspect of a day of departure, because it changed the outward form and almost forbade the use of the customary scene of our only encounters, now altered, covered, as it were, in dust sheets. That day, none the less, marked a stage in the progress of my love, for it was, in a sense, the first sorrow that she was to share with me. There were only our two selves of our little company, and to be thus alone with her was not merely like a beginning of intimacy, but also, on her part, as though she had come there solely to please me, and in such weather, it seemed to me as touching as if on one of those days on which she had been invited to a party, she had given it up in order to come to me in the Champs Elysées. I acquired more confidence in the vitality, in the future of a friendship which could remain so much alive amid the torpor, the solitude, the decay of our surroundings, and while she dropped pellets of snow down my neck, I smiled lovingly at what seemed to me at once a predilection that she showed for me in this tolerating me as her traveling companion in this new, this wintry land, and a sort of loyalty to me which she preserved through evil times. Presently, one after another, like shyly hopping sparrows, her friends arrived, black against the snow. We got ready to play, and, since this day which had begun so sadly was destined to end in joy, as I went up before the game started to the friend with the sharp voice whom I had heard that first day calling Gilberte by name, she said to me, "No, no, I'm sure you'd much rather be in Gilberte's camp. Besides, look, she's signaling to you." She was, in fact, summoning me to cross the snowy lawn to her camp, to take the field, which the sun, by casting over it a rosy gleam, the metallic luster of old and worn brocades, had turned into a field of the cloth of gold. This day which I had begun with so many misgivings was, as it happened, one of the few on which I was not unduly wretched. For although I no longer thought now of anything save not to let a single day pass without seeing Gilberte, so much so that once, when my grandmother had not come home by dinner time, I could not resist the instinctive reflection that if she had been run over in the street and killed, I should not for some time be allowed to play in the Champs Elysees. When one is in love, one has no love left for any one. Yet those moments which I spent in her company, for which I had waited with so much impatience all night and morning, for which I had quivered with excitement, to which I would have sacrificed everything else in the world, were by no means happy moments. Well did I know it, for they were the only moments in my life on which I concentrated a scrupulous, undistracted attention, and yet I could not discover in them one atom of pleasure. All the time that I was away from Gilberte, I wanted to see her, because, having incessantly sought to form a mental picture of her, I was unable in the end to do so, and did not know exactly to what my love corresponded. Besides, she had never yet told me that she loved me. Far from it, she had often boasted that she knew other little boys whom she preferred to myself; that I was a good companion, with whom she was always willing to play, although I was too absent-minded, not attentive enough to the game. Moreover, she had often shown signs of apparent coldness towards me, which might have shaken my faith that I was for her a creature different from the rest, had that faith been founded upon a love that Gilberte had felt for me, and not, as was the case, upon the love that I felt for her, which strengthened its resistance to the assaults of doubt by making it depend entirely upon the manner in which I was obliged by an internal compulsion to think of Gilberte. But my feelings with regard to her I had never yet ventured to express to her in words. Of course, on every page of my exercise books I wrote out in endless repetition her name and address, but at the sight of those vague lines which I might trace without her having to think on that account of me, I felt discouraged, because they spoke to me not of Gilberte, who would never so much as see them, but of my own desire, which they seemed to show me in its true colors, as something purely personal, unreal, tedious, and ineffective. The most important thing was that we should see each other, Gilberte and I, and should have an opportunity of making a mutual confession of our love, which until then would not officially, so to speak, have begun. Doubtless the various reasons which made me so impatient to see her would have appeared less urgent to a grown man. As life goes on, we acquire such adroitness in the culture of our pleasures that we content ourselves with that which we derive from thinking of a woman, as I was thinking of Gilberte, without troubling ourselves to ascertain whether the image corresponds to the reality, and with the pleasure of loving her, without needing to be sure also that she loves us. Or again, that we renounce the pleasure of confessing our passion for her, so as to preserve and enhance the passion that she has for us, like those Japanese gardeners who, to obtain one perfect blossom, will sacrifice the rest. But at the period when I was in love with Gilberte, I still believed that love did really exist, apart from ourselves, that allowing us, at the most, to surmount the obstacles in our way, it offered us its blessings in an order in which we were not free to make the least alteration. It seemed to me that if I had on my own initiative substituted for the sweetness of a confession a pretense of indifference, I should not only have been depriving myself of one of the joys of which I had most often dreamed, I should have been fabricating of my own free will a love that was artificial and without value, that bore no relation to the truth, whose mysterious and foreordained ways I should thus have been declining to follow. But when I arrived at the Champs Elysees, and as at first sight it appeared was in a position to confront my love, so as to make it undergo the necessary modifications with its living and independent cause, as soon as I was in the presence of that Gilberte Swann on the sight of whom I had counted to revive the images that my tired memory had lost and could not find again, of that Gilberte Swann with whom I had been playing the day before, and whom I had just been prompted to greet and then to recognize by a blind instinct, like that which when we are walking sets one foot before the other without giving us time to think what we are doing. Then at once it became as though she and the little girl who had inspired my dreams had been two different people. If, for instance, I had retained in my memory overnight two fiery eyes above plump and rosy cheeks, Gilberte's face would now offer me, and with emphasis, something that I distinctly had not remembered, a certain sharpening and prolongation of the nose, which, instantaneously associating itself with certain others of her features, assumed the importance of those characteristics which in natural history are used to define a species, and transformed her into a little girl of the kind that have sharpened profiles. While I was making myself ready to take advantage of this long expected moment, and to surrender myself to the impression of Gilberte which I had prepared beforehand, but could no longer find in my head to an extent which would enable me, during the long hours which I must spend alone, to be certain that it was indeed herself whom I had in mind, that it was indeed my love for her that I was gradually making grow, as a book grows when one is writing it. She threw me a ball. And like the idealist philosopher, whose body takes account of the external world in the reality of which his intellect declines to believe, the same self which had made me salute her before I had identified her now urged me to catch the ball that she tossed to me, as though she had been a companion with whom I had come to play, and not a sister soul with whom my soul had come to be united, made me, out of politeness, until the time came when she had to go, address 1,000 polite and trivial remarks to her, and so prevented me both from keeping a silence in which I might at last have laid my hand upon the indispensable, escaped idea, and from uttering the words which might have made that definite progress in the course of our love on which I was always obliged to count only for the following afternoon. There was, however, an occasional development. One day we had gone with Gilberte to the stall of our own special vendor, who was always particularly nice to us, since it was to her that Monsieur Swann used to send for his gingerbread, of which, for reasons of health, he suffered from a racial eczema, and from the constipation of the profits. He consumed a great quantity. Gilberte pointed out to me with a laugh two little boys who were like the little artist and the little naturalist in the children's story books, for one of them would not have a red stick of rock because he preferred the purple, while the other, with tears in his eyes, refused a plum which his nurse was buying for him, because, as he finally explained in passionate tones, "I want the other plum, it's got a worm in it." I purchased 2 halfpenny marbles. With admiring eyes I saw, luminous and imprisoned in a bowl by themselves, the agate marbles which seemed precious to me because they were as fair and smiling as little girls, and because they cost 5 pence each. Gilberte, who was given a great deal more pocket money than I ever had, asked me which I thought the prettiest. They were as transparent, as liquid seeming as life itself. I would not have had her sacrifice a single one of them. I should have liked her to be able to buy them, to liberate them all. Still, I pointed out one that had the same color as her eyes. Gilberte took it, turned it about until it shone with a ray of gold, fondled it, paid its ransom, but at once handed me her captive, saying, "Take it. It is for you. I give it to you. Keep it to remind yourself of me." Another time, being still obsessed by the desire to hear Berma and the classic drama, I had asked her whether she had not a copy of a pamphlet in which Bergotte spoke of Racine, and which was now out of print. She had told me to let her know the exact title of it, and that evening I had sent her a little telegram, writing on its envelope the name, Gilberte Swann, which I had so often traced in my exercise books. Next day she brought me in a parcel tied with pink bows and sealed with white wax the pamphlet, a copy of which she had managed to find. "You see, it is what you asked me for," she said, taking from her muff the telegram that I had sent her. But in the address on the pneumatic message, which, only yesterday, was nothing, was merely a little blue that I had written; and after a messenger had delivered it to Gilberte's porter, and a servant had taken it to her in her room, had become a thing without value or distinction, one of the little blues that she had received in the course of the day. I had difficulty in recognizing the futile, straggling lines of my own handwriting beneath the circles stamped on it at the post office, the inscriptions added in pencil by a postman, signs of effectual realization, seals of the external world, violet bands symbolical of life itself, which for the first time came to espouse, to maintain, to raise, to rejoice my dream. And there was another day on which she said to me, "You know, you may call me Gilberte. In any case, I'm going to call you by your first name. It's too silly not to." Yet she continued for a while to address me by the more formal vous, and when I drew her attention to this, smiled, and composing, constructing a phrase like those that are put into the grammar books, of foreign languages, with no other object than to teach us to make use of a new word, ended it with my Christian name. And when I recalled later what I had felt at the time, I could distinguish the impression of having been held for a moment in her mouth, myself, naked, without, any longer, any of the social qualifications which belonged equally to her other companions, and, when she used my surname, to my parents, accessories of which her lips, by the effort that she made a little after her father's manner, to articulate the words to which she wished to give a special value, had the air of stripping, of divesting me, as one peels the skin from a fruit of which one is going to put only the pulp into one's mouth; while her glance, adapting itself to the same new degree of intimacy as her speech, fell on me also more directly, not without testifying to the consciousness, the pleasure, even the gratitude that it felt, accompanying itself with a smile. But at that actual moment I was not able to appreciate the worth of these new pleasures. They were given, not by the little girl whom I loved, to me who loved her, but by the other, her with whom I used to play, to my other self, who possessed neither the memory of the true Gilberte, nor the fixed heart which alone could have known the value of a happiness for which it alone had longed. Even after I had returned home I did not taste them, since every day the necessity which made me hope that on the morrow I should arrive at the clear, calm, happy contemplation of Gilberte, that she would at last confess her love for me, explaining to me the reasons by which she had been obliged hitherto to conceal it, that same necessity forced me to regard the past as of no account, to look ahead of me only, to consider the little advantages that she had given me, not in themselves, and as if they were self-sufficient, but like fresh rungs of the ladder on which I might set my feet, which were going to allow me to advance a step further, and finally to attain the happiness which I had not yet encountered. If at times she showed me these marks of her affection, she troubled me also by seeming not to be pleased to see me, and this happened often on the very days on which I had most counted for the realization of my hopes. I was sure that Gilberte was coming to the Champs Elysees, and I felt an elation which seemed merely the anticipation of a great happiness, when going into the drawing room in the morning to kiss Mamma, who was already dressed to go out, the coils of her black hair elaborately built up, and her beautiful hands, plump and white, fragrant still with soap, I had been apprised by seeing a column of dust standing by itself in the air above the piano, and by hearing a barrel organ playing beneath the window, en revenant de la revue, that the winter had received until nightfall an unexpected, radiant visit from a day of spring. While we sat at luncheon by opening her window, the lady opposite had sent packing, in the twinkling of an eye, from beside my chair, to sweep in a single stride over the whole width of our dining room, a sunbeam which had lain down there for its midday rest, and returned to continue it there a moment later. At school, during the 1 o'clock lesson, the sun made me sick with impatience and boredom as it let fall a golden stream that crept to the edge of my desk, like an invitation to the feast at which I could not myself arrive before 3 o'clock, until the moment when Françoise came to fetch me at the school gate, and we made our way toward the Champs Elysees, through streets decorated with sunlight, dense with people, over which the balconies, detached by the sun and made vaporous, seemed to float in front of the houses like clouds of gold. Alas, in the Champs Elysees I found no Gilberte. She had not yet arrived. Motionless, on the lawn nurtured by the invisible sun, which here and there kindled to a flame the point of a blade of grass, while the pigeons that had alighted upon it had the appearance of ancient sculptures which the gardener's pick had heaved to the surface of a hallowed soil, I stood with my eyes fixed on the horizon, expecting at every moment to see appear the form of Gilberte, following that of her governess, behind the statue that seemed to be holding out the child which it had in its arms, and which glistened in the stream of light, to receive benediction from the sun. The old lady who read the debates was sitting on her chair, in her invariable place, and had just accosted a park keeper, with a friendly wave of her hands towards him as she exclaimed, "What a lovely day!" And when the chairwoman came up to collect her penny, with an infinity of smirks and affectations, she folded the ticket away inside her glove, as though it had been a posy of flowers, for which she had sought in gratitude to the donor the most becoming place upon her person. When she had found it, she performed a circular movement with her neck, straightened her boa, and fastened upon the collector, as she showed her the end of yellow paper that stuck out over her bare wrist, the bewitching smile with which a woman says to a young man, pointing to her bosom, "You see, I'm wearing your roses." I dragged Françoise, on the way towards Gilberte, as far as the Arc de Triomphe. We did not meet her, and I was returning towards the lawn convinced, now, that she was not coming, when in front of the wooden horses the little girl with the sharp voice flung herself upon me. "Quick, quick! Gilberte's been here a quarter of an hour. She's just going. We've been waiting for you to make up a prisoner's base." End of Part 4, Section 3.